I want you to put yourself in a specific scenario right now. Like, really try to visualize this.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah. So you are completely alone in your house. It's late at night. The lights are dim. Maybe you're just reading a book on the couch or, half watching television.
Right, a totally normal evening.
Exactly. And then out of nowhere, the temperature in the room just seems to drop. You feel this sudden, inexplicable chill run down your arms.
Oh, I hate that feeling.
Right. And you catch this fleeting gray kind of cloudy shadow darting just in the absolute corner of your peripheral vision.
Yep, the classic corner of the eye phantom.
But it gets worse, because worse than the shadow, you feel the distinct, heavy, undeniable presence of someone or something standing right behind you.
Oh, wow.
Like you can almost feel the air displacing. You spin around, your heart is just pounding out of your chest, and there's absolutely nothing there.
It's an incredibly visceral reaction. I mean, from a physiological standpoint,
Yeah.
your body is instantly thrown into a massive sympathetic nervous system response.
Totally. Fight or flight, right.
Exactly. The immediate biological cascade is this huge spike in heart rate, cold sweat, pupil dilation, and just this overwhelming sense of dread.
Yeah.
But the really fascinating thing is that your mind, in that terrifying split second, it immediately races to fill the empty room with an explanation.
Right. And for, thousands of years across basically every culture and era of human history, that immediate explanation has been ghosts.
The spirits, the supernatural, yeah.
Exactly. But today, we are going on a very different kind of journey. We're not hunting for ghosts today.
No, definitely not.
We are hunting for the science of the supernatural. I'm looking at a massive stack of sources on the table right now for this deep dive.
It's a big stack.
It really is.
Right.
We have cognitive psychology studies, complex acoustical physics research, and some truly wild neuro-electromagnetic experiments.
Which are so fun to talk about.
Oh, absolutely. So our mission today is to unpack the literal architecture of a haunting and figure out exactly why our brains are so capable of creating these phantoms.
Which is such a profound shift in perspective, really. Because when you dive into this research, you realize the ghosts aren't floating through the walls of old Victorian houses.
Right.
They are generated entirely within the electrical storms of our own neurology.
It's all in our heads, literally.
Literally.
Yeah.
The core theme across all these papers is that the human brain is fundamentally the ultimate meaning-making machine. It absolutely despises a vacuum.
A vacuum of information, you mean?
Yes, exactly. When the brain encounters a void, and that void could be a patch of random visual noise in a dark room, or sudden absolute silence, or even a profound emotional loss, it aggressively fills in the blanks.
It just cannot tolerate missing information.
It really can't. It will hallucinate rather than accept a lack of data.
The brain filling the void. That is such a compelling way to frame this, and we have an incredible roadmap to explore exactly how it executes that today.
We really do.
We're going to start with the basic, fundamental visual wiring of your brain and how it, quite frankly, lies to you on a daily basis.
Constantly lies to you.
Right. Then we're going to explore the deeply poignant ways that human grief can literally summon an apparition into your living room.
That part is so fascinating.
It really is.
Okay.
After that, we're traveling to a 14th century cellar in England that researchers found was literally vibrating with an invisible physical ghost frequency.
The acoustics of fear.
Yes. And finally, we're going to look at some highly controversial laboratory experiments where scientists figured out how to artificially trigger a paranormal encounter.
Or even the feeling of encountering God.
Exactly, using nothing but incredibly weak computer-generated magnetic fields.
It really represents a progression from the mundane, everyday tricks of perception all the way to the absolute core of human consciousness.
It does. And to begin that journey, we have to start by understanding how aggressively our brains are hardwired to find faces in the static.
Okay, let's open up this first set of cognitive psychology papers.
So we have to start with a concept called pareidolia. I know it sounds like a rare medical condition, but it's actually a phenomenon you experience probably every single day.
Multiple times a day, usually.
Yeah. The literature defines it as the psychological tendency to impose a meaningful interpretation on a nebulous or random visual stimulus.
Right.
So in layman's terms, that's seeing a pattern, usually a face or a recognizable object, where there is absolutely nothing but random shapes, like seeing a dragon in a cloud formation.
Yeah, if we zoom out slightly to the broader psychological framework, pareidolia is actually a subcategory of something called apophenia.
Apophenia, right?
Yeah, epiphany is the broader human tendency to perceive meaningful connections between completely unrelated things. It's, the engine behind gambling fallacy.
Like seeing numeric patterns in the lottery.
Exactly. But face pareidolia is incredibly specific, and it's heavily localized in our visual cortex and deeply, deeply embedded in our evolutionary biology.
Because it kept us alive.
Precisely. The sources emphasize that this isn't some late-stage cognitive error. This is not your conscious, rational mind just being overly imaginative or playful.
It's way deeper than that.
Much deeper. This mechanism fires in the brain before you are even aware you're looking at something.
I was reading the evolutionary breakdown of this and it blew my mind. Think of your brain as a highly sensitive, perhaps overly sensitive smoke detector.
That's a great analogy.
Right. So from an evolutionary standpoint, imagine you are an early hominid walking through the tall grass of the savannah. It's getting dark.
Spooky time.
Yeah. You look over and you see a vague, chaotic arrangement of shadows, leaves, and branches that sort of looks like the face of a predatory cat staring back at you.
A tiger in the grass.
Exactly. Now, your brain has to make a split-second calculation. It has two choices. Option A, it can assume it's just a random collection of shadows, ignore it, conserve your energy, and keep walking.
Right.
Or option B, it can flag it as a tiger, pump your bloodstream full of adrenaline, and make you run away in absolute terror.
And the mathematics of natural selection heavily, heavily favor option B, the false positive.
Better safe than sorry.
Exactly. We call this signal detection theory.
Yeah.
If your internal smoke detector goes off every single time you burn a piece of toast, it is undeniably annoying. It wastes energy.
But not totally annoying.
But if that smoke detector fails to go off when there's an actual fire burning in the kitchen, the consequence is fatal. You don't survive to pass on your genetics.
Wow. Yeah.
So human beings evolved to be hypersensitive face detectors. It's evolutionarily infinitely safer to accidentally see a face in a random bush, panic, and run away, than to rationally write it off as an optical illusion and then get eaten by a leopard.
We are the descendants of the hominids who ran away from shadows.
We absolutely are.
The data on how incredibly fast this visual processing happens is what really stands out in the research, though. The stack includes these magnetoencephalography studies.
Which is such a mouthful.
It is. For anyone unfamiliar, it's a neuroimaging technique. It basically measures the incredibly tiny magnetic fields produced by the electrical activity in your brain using these hypersensitive sensors called squewides.
I love that acronym. Squewides.
Me too. And the researchers found that when you look at an inanimate object that merely resembles a face, like a car grill or a wall outlet, the fusiform face area of your brain activates in a staggering 165 milliseconds.
That speed is practically instantaneous. I mean, to put that 165 milliseconds into context, if you look at an image of a real, actual human face.
Like a photo of my brother.
Yeah, a photo of your family member. That exact same fusiform face area activates at about 130 milliseconds.
Wait, so it's almost the exact same speed.
Almost exactly. So your brain is processing a cloud that vaguely looks like a face, almost as rapidly as it processes legitimate human features.
That is wild.
Furthermore, a 2022 EEG study we reviewed took this a step further. They mapped the sequence of the brain waves and found proactive firing in the frontal cortex that begins before the visual signal even fully reaches the occipitotemporal areas.
Wait, hold on. Let me make sure I understand that. Proactive firing. You mean the brain is preparing to see the face before the eyes have even finished sending the picture?
Exactly. And that is the crux of top-down processing.
Top-down processing, okay.
Your frontal lobe, which houses your expectations, your context, and your current emotional state, is essentially projecting a template onto the incoming visual noise.
It's hunting for a face.
It is actively hunting for demeanor, emotion, and identity before your conscious mind even receives the raw visual data from your optic nerve.
Which perfectly explains why I can look at a text message consisting of nothing but a colon and a closing parenthesis and instantly, undeniably feel that it is a happy face.
Yes, your brain is desperate to extract emotional meaning from those two punctuation marks.
But this hyperactive software leads to some hilarious and sometimes world-altering real-world examples. The sources talk about mimetoliths, which are natural rock formations that look like faces or animals.
Right, geology mimicking biology.
And the most famous example of pareidolia in modern history has to be the face on Mars.
Oh, the history of Martian pareidolia is just a perfect case study. It actually dates back to 1877 when the Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli was looking through early telescopes.
What did he see?
He thought he saw straight lines on the Martian surface. He called them canali, meaning channels, but it was mistranslated into English as canals.
Oh, no.
Yeah. This single mistranslation, combined with apophenia, led astronomers like Percival Lowell to spend decades theorizing about a dying race of sentient Martians building vast irrigation networks.
All from a translation error and some blurry lines.
Exactly. But the specific face on Mars you mentioned happened in 1976. NASA's Viking 1 satellite was orbiting Mars to find a landing site.
Great.
It took a photograph of the Cydonia region, and the specific angle of the sun, casting shadows over a 2-mile-long mesa, made it look remarkably like a massive, staring human face looking up into space.
And the public went absolutely wild over this.
They really did.
I remember seeing documentaries about this when I was younger. It spawned decades of conspiracy theories, books, and movies about ancient Martian civilizations building monuments.
People projected entire mythologies onto a blurry photo of a rock.
They really did. And of course, in 1998, the Mars Global Surveyor flew over the exact same spot with a much higher resolution camera under different lighting conditions.
And proved it was just a completely normal, heavily eroded hill.
Yep. No eyes, no mouth, just geology.
The brain simply saw what it was evolutionarily primed to see. It's the exact same mechanism behind the man in the moon.
Or why East Asian cultures see the moon rabbit pounding an elixir.
Exactly. We project our cultural expectations onto the chaotic craters of a celestial body.
My personal favorite example from the sources is a bit more ridiculous, but it proves the point perfectly. During the pandemic, there was a massive internet meme surrounding the video game Among Us.
Oh, I remember this.
Right, so if you aren't familiar, the characters in the game are these little, distinct, rounded, faceless astronauts. Because people were playing the game constantly, their brains became primed with that specific shape.
Highly primed.
Suddenly, people started experiencing pareidolia everywhere. They saw these crewmates in the shape of trash cans, fire hydrants, electrical boxes, clouds.
It was everywhere.
And in 2021, someone found a McDonald's Chicken McNugget shaped vaguely like an Among Us character. They put it on eBay as a joke.
Oh, wait, I remember the headline for this.
An anonymous buyer actually purchased it for $99,997.
A nearly $100,000 piece of fried pareidolia.
Unbelievable.
It highlights how expectation and cultural priming drive the visual cortex. But while the chicken nugget is amusing, the implications become incredibly profound when we look at how pareidolia shapes our spiritual and religious realities.
Right, it gets much more serious.
It does. The brain doesn't just look for faces. It looks for what it wants or expects to see, and it is heavily influenced by verbal suggestion and environmental context.
Like the Shroud of Turin experiment.
Yes. There is an incredibly rigorous experiment detailed in our cognitive psychology sources regarding the Shroud of Turin.
I was fascinated by this study. For context for the listener, the Shroud of Turin is the famous length of linen cloth that bears the faint negative image of a crucified man.
Right.
For centuries, many people have believed it to be the authentic burial shroud of Jesus of Nazareth. Over the years, observers have claimed to see all sorts of hidden, microscopic details woven into the fabric.
Like Roman coins over the eyes.
Exactly, or specific plant species from the Middle East, hidden inscriptions, even insects.
So researchers wanted to test how much of those hidden details were objective reality versus pareidolia driven by the intense religious significance of the object.
How much was the brain synthesizing data that wasn't there?
Exactly. So they designed a brilliant experiment. They didn't use the shroud itself. They took a photograph of completely plain, ordinary, modern linen cloth.
Just normal fabric.
Just normal, highly magnified, chaotic fabric threads. They divided their participants into 3 groups to test the power of priming.
All right.
With the first group, the researchers were very neutral. They just said, hey, please look closely at this cloth. There might be some words hidden in the weave.
And what happened?
The participants stared at the random threads and collectively claimed to see 2 vaguely religious words.
Which makes sense. If you stare at static long enough, you'll see a shape. But what did they do with the second group?
With the second group, they provided a very specific prime. They told the participants, the cloth you are looking at has profound religious importance.
And that was the only difference.
That was the only difference. They didn't suggest any specific words. But that group stared at the exact same photo of plain fabric and collectively hallucinated 12 distinct religious words.
That is wild. Just telling the brain, this object is holy, physically changed the output of their visual cortex to generate holy symbols.
The effect of top-down processing is immense. But the third group is where it becomes undeniable.
Oh, right.
For group 3, the researchers told them the cloth had religious importance, and they gave them a list of suggested possible religious words they might find.
Oh, wow. They basically gave them the answer key.
Exactly. That group looked at the plain fabric and hallucinated 37 distinct religious words in the random threads.
37.
The verbal context completely dictated the visual hallucination. The researchers posited that the primary reason people see so many complex, validating symbols in the Shroud of Turin is simply that they approach the artifact already believing it holds the imprint of the divine.
The pattern matching software is completely hijacked by their reverence and expectation.
Exactly.
And as I kept reading, I realized this phenomenon doesn't just happen with our eyes. The auditory cortex does the exact same thing.
Auditory pareidolia.
Yes. If you grew up in the 1980s, you definitely remember the massive cultural panic over backmasking in rock music.
Oh, the satanic panic.
Exactly. There were congressional hearings about the idea that heavy metal bands like Judas Priest were hiding satanic messages in their records.
Right, and if you played the vinyl backwards, you would hear commands to worship the devil.
But when you break it down scientifically, it's just the brain desperately trying to map linguistic structure onto random reversed acoustic noise.
It's the same smoke detector mechanism.
Exactly. If you listen to a reverse record cold, it just sounds like gibberish.
Right.
But the moment someone hands you a piece of paper with the lyrics and says, listen closely, right here he says, worship Satan.
Suddenly you hear it with perfect clarity.
And you can never unhear it.
The acoustic psychologist Diana Deutsch demonstrated the mechanics of this beautifully back in 1995.
The phantom words algorithm.
Yes, she invented a specific algorithm to test how the brain processes ambiguous sound. She created an audio track consisting of staggered stereo noise.
What does that mean exactly?
Essentially, it plays a sequence of repeating, synthesized syllables from two different speakers, but there is a phase offset in time. It creates this highly structured, pulsating static.
Okay, got it.
If you set a subject in a room and have them listen to this structured static for a few minutes, their brain's auditory cortex simply cannot tolerate the lack of meaning.
It hates the void.
Hates it. Phantom words and coherent phrases will suddenly emerge from the noise.
And reading about what the subjects actually heard was the most revealing part for me.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the phrases they heard weren't random. They almost always reflected whatever was occupying the subject's subconscious mind at that very moment.
It's an acoustic mirror.
Right. If a participant was stressed about their mortgage, they started hearing financial terms in the static. If they were fasting or hungry, they heard words about food.
The brain takes its own internal anxieties, desires, or preoccupations and projects them outward, hallucinating them into the environmental noise.
And I was amazed to read that we actually use this hardwired glitch deliberately in modern medicine.
Medical pareidolia. It's fascinating.
Dr. Patrick Foyer, a medical professor, wrote this incredible paper about how radiology educators actively rely on pareidolia to teach medical students how to read complex X-rays and MRI scans.
They deliberately train the students' neural networks to hunt for faces.
Exactly. They teach them to look for something called the winking owl sign in the spine.
I love this example.
If you look at a healthy spinal vertebra on an X-ray, the bone structure looks remarkably like the face of an owl with two open eyes.
Right.
But if a metastatic cancer has eroded one of the pedicles of the bone, that side disappears. It looks like one of the owl's eyes is closed. It's winking.
The visual anchor of the winking owl allows the medical student to spot a microscopic tumor in a sea of gray static almost instantly.
Which is incredible. Foyer's paper also discusses the Scotty dog sign in lumbar X-rays, which helps identify fractures.
He even published a tongue-in-cheek but highly accurate paper in 2021 about the sacrum.
Oh, the Baby Yoda sign.
Yes. He showed how human sacral anatomy, when viewed in certain cross-sectional MRI slices, looks exactly like the face of Baby Yoda from The Mandalorian.
That is amazing.
The sacral nerve openings form the large eyes. The sacral canal is the mouth. By utilizing our hardwired, inescapable pareidolia, senior doctors can rapidly train the brains of their students to instantly recognize healthy anatomy versus pathological anomalies.
So if we synthesize everything from this first section of the deep dive, your brain is an aggressive, proactive, meaning-making machine.
It is hardwired to construct Faces, voices, and profound meaning out of random shadows, static, and fabric threads.
It's a survival mechanism that keeps you alive and helps you navigate a chaotic world. But, and this is a big but, that raises a devastating question.
It does.
What happens when that pattern matching software is hijacked not just by a shadow in the woods or a suggestive word, but by profound emotional trauma?
Right.
What happens when your brain is desperately, relentlessly searching for one specific face or one specific voice that has been permanently removed from your life?
That specific scenario brings us to one of the most misunderstood, highly stigmatized, yet profoundly common human experiences documented in psychological literature.
The grief hallucination.
Exactly.
I have to admit, reading this section of our sources, looking at the clinical psychology of bereavement, it was incredibly moving.
It is very heavy.
Yeah. When society talks about seeing ghosts, the immediate cultural jump is to haunted houses, horror movies, or paranormal investigators in night vision goggles.
Right, the spooky stuff.
But the statistical reality is that the vast majority of ghost sightings happen to completely ordinary, rational people in the immediate days, weeks, and months after losing someone they love deeply.
And the statistics presented in these bereavement studies are truly staggering. According to the data, between 30 to 50% of all people in mourning experience some form of hallucination of their deceased loved one.
Wait, up to 50%? Half the population?
Up to half of the entire bereaved population. If you consider how many people pass away every day, millions of people are experiencing these visions.
That is a massive number of people.
It is. Yet, society heavily stigmatizes this phenomena. People who experience these grief hallucinations almost never tell anyone.
Because they think they're crazy.
Exactly. They keep it a closely guarded secret. They feel embarrassed. They fear that their friends or family won't believe them. Or, far worse, they harbor an internal terror that they're showing the early signs of a severe psychiatric illness.
Like schizophrenia or dementia.
Right. But the psychological consensus we are looking at recognizes this as completely normal. It is benign, and in many cases, it is actually incredibly beneficial to the grieving process.
It's a natural part of bereavement that transcends cultures, religious beliefs, and time periods. There is an anecdote in the sources from Dr. Karen Stolznow that perfectly encapsulates how visceral and real these experiences are.
Oh, you mean the department store incident with your grandmother?
Yes. It is a classic textbook presentation of a bereavement hallucination.
Yeah.
Let me set the scene based on her account. Imagine her grandmother, Ruby. She's described as a very no-nonsense, pragmatic woman. She is not prone to fantasy. She doesn't read ghost stories, and she has absolutely no history of mental illness or cognitive decline.
A very grounded person.
Very grounded. Her father had passed away just 1 week prior. The grief is fresh, but she's trying to go about her day. She's walking through a completely mundane, brightly lit environment, a local department store.
There's nothing spooky about a department store.
Not at all. Suddenly, over the store's tinny ceiling speakers, her late father's absolute favorite song begins to play.
The trigger.
Exactly. She stops in her tracks. She's instantly flooded with memories and thoughts of him. And at that exact moment, her father manifests physically in front of her.
Wow.
Not as a blurry shadow, not as a trick of the light. He is standing right there in the aisle. He looks directly at her with perfect clarity and says, "Don't worry, Ruby, I'm fine."
That is so powerful.
And then, in the blink of an eye, he vanishes. For the remainder of her life, despite her pragmatic nature, Ruby remained absolutely convinced that she had been visited by his actual spirit.
And if we look at that through a neurological and psychological lens, we can chart exactly why that happened to Ruby's brain.
Right, the mechanics of the void.
Exactly. The brilliant neurologist Oliver Sacks, who wrote the seminal book Hallucinations, framed the mechanics of this beautifully.
What did he say?
He noted that losing a parent, a spouse, or a child creates a sudden, massive void in a person's life. And returning to our earlier theme, the brain cannot tolerate a void.
It has to fill it.
It is a sensory, emotional, and temporal hole that the mind unconsciously, desperately tries to fill.
I want to focus on the triggers for these grief hallucinations because the studies show they aren't random. People don't usually hallucinate their lost loved ones floating in the sky.
No, they are triggered by deeply anchored, highly ingrained sensory associations.
Right. For Ruby, the trigger was auditory, the specific song over the speakers.
But for someone else, it might be the olfactory trigger of smelling their late wife's specific brand of perfume in a crowded room.
Or the auditory anticipation of hearing their husband's car pull into the driveway at exactly 5:30 the way it did for 40 years.
Yes, the anticipation. They hear the phantom tires on the gravel. They hear the phantom key turning in the front door. They hear the footsteps in the hall.
The sources even mention people feeling the distinct physical weight of their spouse getting into the other side of the bed next to them in the dark.
This happens because the brain is, above all else, an anticipation machine. It operates on a framework called predictive coding.
Predictive coding?
We spend decades becoming so intimately attuned to the presence, the rhythms, and the sensory footprint of our loved ones that our neural pathways have literally grown accustomed to their daily input.
It's hardwired into the structure of the brain.
It is. When that person is abruptly, permanently gone, the expectation of their presence remains deeply etched in the neurology. The sense of loss is so overwhelming, and the brain is so hyper-vigilant for signs of them that it takes a stray sound.
Like a house settling.
Right, or a distant car or a familiar scent, and the predictive coding software unconsciously fills in the gap. The grieving person's conscious mind knows they are gone, but their lower-level neurology is not yet ready to let go.
So the brain provides a transitional reality to soften the shock.
Exactly.
I was thinking about this while reading the literature, and I want to bounce an analogy off you to see if it holds up neurologically.
Go for it.
Is a grief hallucination essentially the exact same mechanism as phantom limb syndrome, but applied to a human relationship?
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Like, we know from medical science that if a soldier has their arm amputated, their brain's somatosensory cortex still retains the entire detailed sensory map for that missing arm.
Yes, the homunculus.
Right. The neurons assigned to that arm are still alive, they still spontaneously fire, and the patient feels intense itching or pain or temperature in a limb that is completely gone.
That's right.
So if your brain is accustomed to 40 years of constant neurological input from your spouse, their voice, their smell, their touch, and they're suddenly amputated from your life, do those relational sensory pathways just keep firing on their own, projecting a phantom spouse into the room?
That is an incredibly astute analogy. And yes, from a neuroplasticity standpoint, the underlying mechanisms share profound similarities.
Really?
Yeah. In phantom limb syndrome, the physical map of the body and the brain is still receiving spontaneous nerve signals from the severed nerve endings and interpreting them according to the old, outdated map of the body.
Okay.
In the case of grief hallucinations, the brain's predictive coding network is still operating on the fundamental map of your daily life where that spouse exists.
Yeah.
The expectation actively shapes the reality. When the brain encounters a stimulus, like the smell of a specific cologne, the predictive model instantly says, "My husband is here," and it literally renders the complex sensory experience of the husband to match the prediction before the rational frontal lobe can override it with the reality of his passing.
And reading the accounts of the patients, you realize it serves a vital purpose. For many people, just like Ruby, experiencing that hallucination is a deeply reassuring sign.
It provides immense comfort.
It does. It offers a sense of solace, a chance to say a final goodbye, and it helps the neurology gradually adjust to the stark permanence of the loss while temporarily maintaining an emotional bond.
It acts as an emotional buffer.
The literature only suggests reaching out to a clinical grief therapist when the despair becomes debilitating, or if the hallucinations cause intense terror instead of comfort. But in the vast majority of cases, the brain is simply acting as its own shock absorber.
The continuity is fascinating. The brain utilizes visual pareidolia to protect our physical bodies from predators in the brush, and it utilizes grief hallucinations to protect our psyche from the immediate crushing weight of absolute absence.
It makes complete, beautiful sense that a grieving mind would summon a comforting phantom just to survive the darkest days of loss. It adds such a layer of empathy to ghost stories.
It really does.
But here is where the deep dive takes a massive turn.
I know where you're going with this.
How do we explain the ghosts that aren't comforting? How do we explain situations where completely unrelated strangers who are experiencing zero grief, who have no connection to a building, walk into a random physical location and experience the exact same terrifying apparition?
Right.
If it isn't grief, and it isn't a shadow looking like a face, what is happening?
To answer that, we have to transition completely away from psychology and neurology and step into the hard realm of acoustical physics.
Yes, let's talk about the physics.
We have to examine the nature of low-frequency sound, and a phenomenon discovered by a British researcher named Vic Tandy.
The physics of fear. This section of the research is easily one of my absolute favorite scientific discoveries because it reads exactly like the setup to a classic horror movie.
It really does.
Yeah.
So we are in the early 1980s. The scientist, Vic Tandy, is working completely alone, very late at night, in a medical laboratory at Coventry University.
It is the prototypical setting for a haunting. The isolated scientist in the dark lab.
Truly. He's alone, he's working at his bench, and suddenly he starts feeling incredibly anxious. His heart rate elevates, he breaks out in a cold sweat.
Just a sudden panic attack.
He describes this very noticeable, heavy feeling of depression and dread descending on him out of nowhere. And then he experiences the classic symptom of a haunting.
The feeling of being watched.
Exactly. The distinct, undeniable feeling that something is standing in the room watching him. He looks up, and out of the absolute corner of his eye, he sees a moving, opaque, gray cloud, a physical apparition looming near his desk. But the moment he turns his head to face it directly, it disappears.
Typical ghost behavior.
Right. He was so unnerved, so genuinely terrified by the visceral reality of this phantom, that he actually packed up his briefcase and went home, refusing to return to the lab until daylight.
Which is a completely reasonable response.
Now, a lesser scientist, or someone highly prone to apophenia, would conclude the lab was haunted, call a priest, and never go back.
Yeah, that would be me.
But Tandy was a rigorous engineer. He returned the next day, determined to find a rational explanation. And the key to the mystery came from a hobby of his.
Fencing.
Yes. Tandy was an avid fencer, and he had brought a foil fencing blade into the lab to do some maintenance work. He was trying to cut a screw thread onto the handle of the foil.
Okay.
To hold it steady, he clamps the handle of the foil firmly into a heavy metal vise bolted to his solid workbench.
And this is the brilliant eureka moment in the story.
It is.
Because while the handle of the foil is clamped completely solid in the vise, the thin tip of the blade suddenly starts vibrating wildly back and forth, just bouncing up and down completely on its own, creating a blur.
Tandy realized immediately, based on the laws of physics, that the blade was receiving mechanical energy from somewhere in the room. Energy that was completely invisible.
A ghost.
No, he calculated the movement of the foil and realized it was behaving exactly like a physical manifestation of a standing sound wave. But the room was completely silent to his ears.
So what was it?
After systematically exploring the lab and talking to the university's facilities engineer, he found the culprit. A newly installed extractor fan at the end of the lab was emitting a low, rumbly tone at a very specific constant frequency.
18.98 hertz.
Exactly.
Which falls into the category of infrasound. Let's break down exactly what infrasound is for anyone who isn't an audio engineer.
Good idea.
Human hearing generally bottoms out at around 20 hertz. Anything lower than 20 hertz, the human ear cannot actually perceive it as a pitch or a note. It is subaudible.
But just because our ears can't translate it into sound doesn't mean it isn't a massive physical force interacting with our environment and our biology.
Right.
Infrasound waves are physically massive. Because the wavelength is so long, they can travel enormous distances, they can pass straight through thick concrete walls with minimal energy loss, and they carry significant physical kinetic energy.
And Tandy made a brilliant, terrifying deduction here.
He discovered that 18.98 hertz happens to be incredibly close to the resonant frequency of the human eyeball.
Which is such a wildly unsettling concept to think about, that your eyeballs have a frequency.
Every physical object in the universe has a resonant frequency, a specific frequency at which it naturally vibrates if exposed to external energy.
Like the classic example of an opera singer shattering a wine glass by hitting the exact right note.
Yes, matching the glass's resonance. The fluid inside the human eyeball, the vitreous humor, resonates at roughly 18 to 19 hertz.
Wow.
When Tandy was sitting in that lab, the silent, invisible sound waves pumping out of the extractor fan were literally, mechanically vibrating his eyeballs in his skull.
Oh, that's so gross.
It is. This physical vibration caused the optical fluid to distort, creating visual smudges in his peripheral vision. The terrifying gray cloud apparition he saw stalking him was actually the physical distortion of his own eyes.
But what about the other symptoms? Seeing a smudge is one thing, but how does an extractor fan explain the profound feelings of dread, the cold sweat, the heavy depression?
Right, because the infrasound wave doesn't just vibrate the eyes. It violently vibrates the inner ear, specifically the vestibular system which controls our sense of balance and spatial orientation.
Oh, which makes you dizzy.
Exactly. This leads to subtle dizziness, nausea, and a profound, vague sense of unease. It vibrates the internal organs in the chest cavity, creating a feeling of pressure or shortness of breath.
Okay, so imagine what is happening in the brain. The brain is receiving massive panic signals from the body: dizziness, hyperventilation, visual anomalies. pressure in the chest.
But the eyes and ears report no visible threat. No tiger, no attacker.
So the brain, our meaning-making machine, takes this terrifying physiological data and synthesizes the only conclusion that fits the sensory input. There is an invisible, dangerous presence in this room.
Tandy published a groundbreaking paper on this called The Ghost in the Machine, officially coining the term the ghost frequency for this 18.98 hertz wave.
But the research didn't start with one broken fan in a modern laboratory. The sources detail a remarkable, extensive case study where Tandy and his team took their highly sensitive acoustic instruments out into the field.
To a profoundly haunted, historic location.
The Coventry Cellar.
The Coventry Cellar investigation is a perfect, rigorous, real-world application of Tandy's theory.
Tell us about the cellar.
The cellar is a 14th century underground room located beneath the Tourist Information Center at 3839 Bailey Lane in Coventry, England.
Very specific.
Very. It was originally owned by a Benedictine priory, built out of massive blocks of solid red sandstone. Over the centuries, the cellar was buried, forgotten, somehow survived the massive bombings of the Coventry Blitz in 1940.
Incredible.
And was finally re-excavated by modern historians. It is now accessed by a long, modern underground passageway, and it has a massive, undeniable reputation in the local community for being haunted.
And the stories detailed in the reports are chilling, specifically because they frequently happen to tourists who have absolutely no idea the place is supposed to be haunted.
Right, so they aren't primed to see a ghost. No top-down processing.
Exactly. I was reading through the specific incident logs recorded by a local tour guide named Colin Cook. Let's look at the incident with the Canadian journalist first.
Okay.
This journalist walks down the corridor, crosses the threshold into the cellar, and instantly he freezes. The guide notes that the color literally drains from his face. He gets full-body goosebumps.
Classic physiological panic response.
He tells the guide he feels an intense, oppressive presence, describing it specifically as feeling like a balloon is being physically inflated and pushed between his shoulder blades.
Wow.
And then he reports seeing the distinct face of a woman peering intensely over his right shoulder. He became so physically nauseous and disoriented, they had to evacuate him from the cellar.
And the incident logs corroborate several similar events. There was an American couple on a tour. The husband walks into the cellar perfectly fine, but the wife is instantly paralyzed right at the threshold.
Right.
She claims an incredibly strong, invisible presence is physically barring her way. She turns ashen pale and absolutely refuses to take another step forward.
There was also a Latvian gentleman who felt a sudden, freezing cold chill and sensed a ghost in the room. You also have accounts from self-described white witches.
What happened with them?
2 of them visited, felt a spirit, but interpreted it as a friendly female entity. Another witch visited later, was frightened to death by an overwhelming sense of malice, and fled.
Even the assistant manager of the center, a woman named Carole Young, who spoke fluent German and led foreign tours, despised going down there.
What did she feel?
She consistently felt a strong chill and an overpowering sense that she was intruding on someone, to the point where she caught herself constantly talking out loud to the empty room just to cope with the anxiety.
So Vic Tandy and his team arrive at the cellar with their acoustic gear. They bring a Brule and Kager precision sound level meter and something called a Sonic dual-channel FFT analyzer.
Before we get to the results, we need to break down what an FFT analyzer actually does, because it's a crucial piece of technology that exposed the ghost.
Okay, lay it on us.
FFT stands for Fast Fourier Transform. Without diving too deeply into the complex mathematics, Joseph Fourier was a brilliant French mathematician who discovered that any complex, messy sound wave, like the ambient noise of a busy street or a drafty cellar, can be mathematically broken down into its simple constituent sine wave frequencies. Think of it like taking a blended fruit smoothie and using a machine to instantly separate it back out into exactly how many strawberries, bananas, and apples were used.
That's a great analogy.
An FFT analyzer takes the jumbled, chaotic ambient noise of a room, runs Fourier's algorithm, and prints out a graph showing you exactly which specific sound frequencies are present in the air and exactly how powerful each one is.
They set the highly sensitive microphone right in the middle of the haunted cellar, left it running to average out all the ambient noise, and waited.
And when they finally printed out the FFT trace graph, it was undeniable.
What was it?
Rising out of the baseline static of the background noise was a massive, sharp, undeniable peak, exactly at 19 hertz.
The ghost frequency. It was sitting right there in the dark.
It was there, and it wasn't a fluke like a passing truck rumbling the pavement outside. They monitored it for hours, and the signal was incredibly consistent. It was a standing wave.
They conducted a stamp test too, right?
Yes, which is exactly what it sounds like. They had someone violently stamp their foot on the ground to create a loud bang. A bang contains a wide spectrum of sound frequencies.
By analyzing how the bang decayed, they could see which frequencies the room naturally amplified.
They found the main cellar room had a natural resonance around 23 hertz based on its length. But the modern corridor leading to the cellar, a 10.95-meter passage that terminates in the door opening, acted exactly like a giant pipe organ or a massive wind instrument.
So the air blowing through it.
When you calculate the effective acoustic length of that specific corridor, it is perfectly tuned to resonate at 18 to 19 hertz. The wind blowing across the entrance was literally playing the hallway like a flute.
The architecture of the building was literally tuned by accident to generate the ghost frequency.
Precisely. It is an architectural anomaly. And the physics of standing waves dictate that the wave's pressure would be at its absolute strongest right at the threshold of the doorway.
Which is exactly the spot where the American woman was paralyzed. And exactly where the Canadian journalist felt the intense physical pressure of the balloon between his shoulder blades. The acoustics perfectly match the ghost sightings.
They really do.
Okay, the math is beautiful, but if I'm a listener right now, I have a major skeptical question. I have to push back on this premise.
Let's hear it.
If a 19 hertz sound wave is completely filling that doorway, why did the American woman freeze in absolute terror, but her husband, who was standing right next to her in the exact same sound wave, felt absolutely nothing?
That's a very fair question.
Why didn't the tour guide, Colin Cook, ever see the woman looking over the journalist's shoulder? If this is pure mechanical physics, shouldn't a 19 hertz wave vibrate every single person's eyeballs equally? Why doesn't everyone see the ghost?
That is the essential, critical question, and it is comprehensively addressed in the sources by Dr. David Swanson's research on acoustic physiology.
What's the answer?
The simple answer is that humans are not physically identical machines. Swanson points out that a small, specific percentage of the population is what he classifies as biologically hypersensitive to the effects of low-frequency sound.
Like motion sickness.
Very similar. Their inner ears might be structurally more susceptible to minute pressure changes. Their optical fluid might resonate more easily due to microscopic differences in eye shape or intraocular pressure.
Okay.
We actually see this phenomenon constantly in the general public with people who get violently seasick or experience chronic migraines just from living near the ocean shore.
Because the ocean is a massive source of infrasound.
Exactly. Natural crashing infrasound, or living near wind turbine farms or airports. Most people are fine, but a subset is completely debilitated.
So experiencing a haunting in that cellar is a perfect storm. It is a combination of the physical presence of the infrasound plus a biological hypersensitivity in the individual's inner ear, plus the psychological context of being in a creepy basement.
It is the ultimate synthesis of physics and psychology. When a biologically hypersensitive individual walks down a cold, dimly lit 14th century stone corridor, their brain is already mildly primed for danger. Then they hit the threshold, and the 19 hertz infrasound wave hits their vestibular system.
And they get dizzy.
They experience a sudden, violent onset of physiological distress nausea, hyperventilation, visual smudges. Their brain desperately, frantically searches for a cause for this sudden illness and fear.
So combining the spooky atmosphere with the severe physical symptoms, the brain synthesizes an apparition to make sense of the data.
The husband didn't see the ghost simply because his specific physiology wasn't resonating with the wave. His smoke detector didn't go off.
Reading further into the sources, I realized this infrasound research is so powerful that it has actually been studied for decades, completely outside the realm of ghost hunting.
Oh, yes.
The papers mention a French researcher, Dr. Vladimir Gavreau, back in 1957. His entire research team started getting violently sick in the robotics lab, experiencing chronic nausea, dizziness, profound fatigue, and deep discomfort.
They initially thought it was a chemical leak or airborne toxin.
Right. They brought in outside health inspectors, and the inspectors got sick too. Finally, they realized the sickness immediately stopped whenever they opened certain windows in the lab.
Because of a fan outside.
Yes, a massive industrial fan on the roof of the building across the street was generating a low-frequency sound wave that was resonating perfectly with the dimensions of Gavreau's lab. Opening the windows altered the resonant frequency of the room and instantly stopped the sickness.
The environmental impact is massive. There's also a famous 1968 study by a researcher named Green that correlated naturally occurring meteorological infrasound with bizarre shifts in human behavior.
Weather infrasound.
Yes. Green found that a massive weather storm system producing high levels of infrasound 1,500 miles away could broadcast those waves through the atmosphere.
1,500 miles.
Yes. He found a statistically significant correlation between the arrival of these subaudible waves and a sudden spike in automobile accidents, school absenteeism, and psychiatric admissions in cities that were experiencing perfectly clear, sunny weather.
That is deeply unsettling. The inaudible waves from a storm 1,000 miles away were subtly disorienting the physiology of the hypersensitive population.
Precisely.
Which naturally makes you realize, if a broken extractor fan or a storm can accidentally incapacitate a scientist or cause car crashes, what happens when someone tries to harness that frequency on purpose? You can't discover an invisible wave that makes people dizzy and terrified without the military getting involved.
Sadly, the history of science confirms that. Colonel John Alexander's book, Future War, which is referenced in our stack, details the military's extensive experiments with infrasound weapons.
So what did they find?
They quickly discovered that trying to blast pure, continuous airborne infrasound across a battlefield is highly inefficient. It's hard to aim and difficult to couple the energy into the human body at a distance.
Okay, so what did they do instead?
The weapons designers shifted their strategy to what is called pulsed periodic stimuli, or PPS. It is an extreme, weaponized form of acoustic modulation.
For the listener, modulation means the core 19 hertz wave isn't just a flat drone, its amplitude, its volume is rising and falling rhythmically, driven by an even lower frequency, like a pulsing throb.
Right.
And incredibly, Vic Tandy's team actually found that exact phenomenon happening naturally in the Coventry cellar. The 19 hertz ghost wave was being modulated by a 2 to 4 hertz signal, making the invisible pressure in the room throb like a heartbeat.
And that specific throbbing, that PPS, is exactly what military acoustic designers use to cause severe perceptual disorientation and extreme physical distress in targeted individuals.
It doesn't rely on deafening volume that destroys the eardrum. It relies on low-intensity, pulsed acoustic energy to bypass the ears and directly induce strong physiological and psychological breakdowns.
That's very effective.
So we have comprehensively unpacked how the physical environment, a drafty hallway or an extractor fan, can literally vibrate our bodies into a state of supernatural terror.
We have.
But as I look at these case studies, I keep coming back to the intensely specific details of these ghost encounters. The feeling of a sentient being, an actual personality in the room.
It's more than just nausea.
Exactly. The Canadian journalist feeling a specific entity looking over his shoulder, that feels far too complex, too neurologically rich to just be a vibrating eyeball and some nausea.
It is a massive leap in complexity, you're correct.
Which leads me to this crazy thought from the final set of papers. What if the environment isn't just vibrating your body mechanically? What if it is actively electromagnetically hacking the underlying software of your brain?
This transition raises what is perhaps the most profound, philosophically shattering question of this entire deep dive.
I am ready for it.
If we accept the neuroscientific premise that all human experience is generated by electrical brain activity, then it logically follows that the absolute highest peaks of human experience, mystical states, the feeling of the presence of God, encounters with angels, demons, or spirits, must also be generated by specific, highly complex cerebral algorithms.
And this brings us to the absolute climax of our source material, the neuro-electromagnetic experiments of Dr. Michael Persinger and L.S. St. Pierre at Laurentian University.
These experiments are legendary.
I read this paper 3 times because I couldn't believe the scale of it. Over 15 years, they conducted 19 separate, highly controlled experiments involving 407 human subjects.
That is a very robust sample size.
It is. Their goal was incredibly audacious. They wanted to prove that they could artificially induce the feeling of a sentient being in a clinical laboratory on command by manipulating the brain's magnetic environment.
And the data shows they succeeded. To understand the magnitude of this, the methodology is vital. They placed these subjects in a completely darkened, double-walled, acoustic, solid metal chamber. This room acted as a Faraday cage.
What does a Faraday cage do?
It uses conductive mesh to completely block out all external electromagnetic noise. No radio waves, no cell signals, no earth geomagnetism. It creates an electromagnetic zero point.
Wow, okay.
Furthermore, the subjects were blindfolded to remove all visual input, creating a total sensory void.
The void again, depriving the meaning-making machine of all data.
Exactly the point. Then the subjects wore a modified motorcycle helmet, often referred to in the literature as the God helmet, equipped with magnetic solenoids.
And they zapped them.
Not sap, no. Through these solenoids, the researchers applied extremely weak magnetic fields to the brain. We were talking about 1 microtesla of power.
How strong is that?
To put that in perspective, that is roughly equivalent to the strength of the Earth's natural background magnetic field, or the magnetic field generated by a standard hairdryer.
Oh, so it's incredibly weak.
It is infinitesimally weak compared to an MRI machine. But the secret to the experiment wasn't the raw strength of the magnetic field. It was the shape, the complexity, and the precise timing.
The pattern.
Yes. They used complex computer software to generate highly specific, rapidly changing temporal patterns. They fired these fluctuating magnetic fields directly across the temporoparietal region of the brain, which is located on the sides of your head, just above and slightly behind the ears.
And the results they recorded were absolutely mind-bending. But before we get to what the subjects saw, we need to break down the underlying biology of why pointing a weak magnet at the side of someone's head makes them see a ghost.
Because it all traces back to how our brain fundamentally constructs our sense of self versus the other.
Right.
The working neurological model for these experiments is deeply rooted in hemispheric lateralization. The human brain is divided into 2 hemispheres.
The left and the right.
The left hemisphere is traditionally associated with language, logical sequencing, and, crucially, our linguistic sense of self. It is the internal voice in your head that says, I am me, I am sitting in this chair.
Okay.
The right hemisphere processes broader spatial awareness, deep emotion, and nonverbal, holistic environmental cues. Normally, under healthy conditions, these 2 hemispheres exist in a state of delicate, synchronized balance, communicating constantly, but maintaining strict functional boundaries.
Okay, while reading this, I came up with an analogy to help visualize it. Think of your brain's 2 hemispheres as 2 roommates living together in a small apartment.
Let's hear it.
The left hemisphere roommate is very chatty, highly organized, always talking about themselves, keeping the calendar, and narrating the day.
Makes sense.
The right hemisphere roommate is much quieter, keeps to themselves in their own room, paints, manages the emotional vibe of the apartment, and keeps track of where the furniture is spatially located. Normally, they get along fine. They just text each other quietly through the wall. That wall being the corpus callosum, the thick band of nerve fibers connecting the 2 brain halves.
That is a highly effective analogy for typical hemispheric communication.
Now, what Persinger and St. Pierre did with their computer-generated magnetic fields was essentially disrupt the apartment's Wi-Fi.
I like this.
They applied slightly more intense magnetic stimulation to the right hemisphere, followed by bilateral stimulation. They artificially forced something called an intracerebral intercalation.
Which is a big fancy word for forcing them to talk.
Exactly. They caused a sudden, unnatural surge of electrical communication across the corpus callosum and the hippocampal commissure. To use the analogy, they made the quiet right hemisphere roommate suddenly kick down the door and violently barge into the left hemisphere's room, shouting emotional and spatial data.
And because this intense intrusion is completely unnatural, unprompted by the environment, and forced purely by the external magnetic field, the dominant left hemisphere does not recognize the incoming barrage of signals as belonging to its own brain.
Wait, really? It thinks it's external.
It interprets this rogue, massive surge of right hemispheric internal data, the sudden influx of spatial awareness and deep emotion, as coming from the outside world.
Oh, wow.
It translates the spatial surge into the only conceptual framework that makes logical sense. An external sentient being has just entered the room. The left hemisphere literally thinks a powerful intruder is in the house.
And because the data is coming from the right hemisphere, which specifically controls spatial awareness, the subject doesn't just think there's a ghost. They literally physically feel the proximity, the weight, and the location of the presence.
The clinical narratives recorded from these subjects are just wild. They recorded the subject speaking in real time inside the chamber.
Let's analyze the specific examples provided in the source text because the details matter immensely here.
Absolutely.
Subject A, described as a middle-aged journalist, had a frequency-modulated pattern applied specifically to their right hemisphere for 30 minutes. Reading from the transcript, Subject A reported, "I see shadows along my left side. There's someone touching my left side, a tunnel experience. I feel as if I'm shrinking and expanding. There is a tingling inside my thigh. Sexual excitement, a cold rush."
And then they reported seeing a full physical apparition.
Just incredible.
Subject C, a 30-year-old woman, experienced profound dissociation. She reported, "I am floating up, vibration moving through my sternum. Odd lights or faces along my left side. My body is becoming very hot. Someone is feeling my ovaries. I feel there is someone in the room behind me."
And then there's Subject D, a young man who received bilateral stimulation, hitting both sides, he reported. "A bright white light, a black spot that became a funnel. I felt moving, spinning forward through it. I began to feel the presence of people along my sides, colorless, gray-looking. I suddenly felt intense fear and felt ice cold."
We must emphasize that these are not subtle, vague experiences. These are profound, emotionally overwhelming, deeply multisensory encounters.
Clearly.
And what is scientifically vital to note here is the laterality of the hallucinations. Notice how Subject A and Subject C both distinctly felt the presence on their left side.
Right. The journalist said the shadows were on the left, and the woman saw faces on her left side.
Because the neurology crosses over. The right hemisphere of the brain controls and monitors the left side of the physical body.
Ah, of course.
When the researchers specifically targeted the right hemisphere with the magnetic fields, over 80% of the subjects reliably felt the presence along their left side.
That proves it's localized.
Furthermore, the emotional valence was linked to the hemisphere. When the right hemisphere intruded into the left, creating a left-sided presence, the subjects overwhelmingly perceived the entity as evil, ego-alien, threatening, or intrusive.
But fascinatingly, when they reversed it and stimulated the left hemisphere, creating a right-sided presence, the subjects frequently described the entity as deeply comforting, secure, or even angelic.
Subject B in the study literally started to cry when the magnetic field was turned off, because a right-sided presence that had given them a profound, enveloping, deep sense of security suddenly faded away into nothing.
It's as if they literally found the volume knobs for encountering God and encountering demons physically located on the side of the human skull.
Which naturally made a lot of people in the scientific and religious communities very, very angry.
Yeah, I mean, you can't just publish a paper effectively saying God is a 1 microtesla magnetic field without sparking massive academic drama.
Definitely not.
And the sources detail a huge, vicious controversy with a Swedish research group led by a scientist named Per Granqvist.
Yes, the infamous Granqvist replication attempt published in 2005.
Tell us what happened there.
The Swedish group built what they firmly believed was the exact same helmet, ran what they thought was the exact same experimental protocol on 89 subjects, and found absolutely nothing. Zero statistical deviation from the placebo group.
No ghosts, no sensed presences, no God.
None. They published a highly critical paper aggressively claiming that Persinger's decades of results were effectively fake.
Wow, just calling him out.
They argued that the weak magnetic fields did absolutely nothing to the brain, and that the only reason Persinger's subjects felt a presence was due entirely to psychological suggestibility.
Like the power of suggestion.
Granqvist claimed Persinger was just testing highly suggestible, naive, New Age college students who went into a dark room desperately wanting to see a ghost and simply hallucinated one.
That is the ultimate academic call-out. Looking at another scientist's life work and saying, your revolutionary neuroscience is just a cheap placebo effect.
It was a direct attack on the integrity of the lab. But Persinger and St. Pierre fired back with this massive reanalysis of all 19 experiments, which forms the core of the source document we are analyzing today.
And they systematically, empirically dismantle the Swedish group's claims using hard data. I really want to unpack Persinger's defense because it's brilliant and gets deep into how rigorous science is actually conducted.
It's a masterclass in scientific defense.
First, let's address Granqvist's main claim. Suggestibility. He said the subjects were just highly suggestible people.
Persinger completely neutralizes that argument by pointing out that in every single one of his studies, the lab strictly controlled for individual suggestibility using a highly standardized clinical tool called the Hypnosis Induction Profile, or HIP.
What does the HIP do?
The HIP measures a person's biological and psychological capacity to be hypnotized or swayed by suggestion. They tested every subject's HIP score before and after the helmet sessions.
And what did the data say?
The massive data set unequivocally showed that a person's suggestibility score had absolutely zero statistical correlation with whether they felt a magnetic presence.
Oh.
Furthermore, to prove it wasn't the environment, the experimenters deliberately tried to use contextual innuendo using spooky voices, suggesting they might see something, to trick subjects during placebo runs where the magnets were off.
And it didn't work.
The suggestion failed. The magnetic field was the only variable that reliably produced the presence.
They even conducted double-blind studies where the experimenter sitting in the room interacting with the subject had absolutely no idea what the true purpose of the experiment was or which specific computer-generated magnetic field was currently being fired into the helmet.
And the subjects still consistently felt the presence only when the highly specific right hemisphere algorithm was active. The placebo theory completely falls apart under double-blind conditions.
But the true revelation, the real death blow to the Swedish group's failed replication, comes down to a seemingly mundane detail about computer hardware.
It all comes down to processing timing.
This was the most fascinating part of the whole controversy to me. It all comes down to the difference between a DOS operating system and a Windows Pentium processor. How does a computer chip hide a ghost?
Persinger's original, highly successful software was designed in the late 80s and 90s for older, slower, DOS-based computers.
Okay.
The complex magnetic fields were generated by a program that read a column of numbers from a text file from 0 to 255.
Got it.
Each number dictated the voltage sent to the helmet's solenoids, shaping the magnetic wave. Crucially, each number was held for an exact point duration, specifically exactly 1 millisecond or exactly 3 milliseconds before moving to the next.
Wait, so precision is key.
This algorithm requires absolute, uninterrupted millisecond precision because it is designed to perfectly match the natural firing rate and resting capacitance of human temporal lobe neurons.
So it's like trying to perfectly match the rhythm of a complex song. If you miss the beat, the neurons don't dance.
That is exactly the mechanism. The Swedish group, trying to modernize the experiment in 2005, used modern, faster Windows Pentium computers.
Windows instead of DOS.
But Windows operating systems handle background tasks differently than DOS. Windows constantly multitasks. It routinely interrupts processing streams to check the mouse, update the clock, check the network. These constant, invisible micro-interruptions altered the millisecond timing of the magnetic pulses being sent to the helmet. It stretched the pulses, delayed them, and completely disconfigured the precise temporal pattern of the magnetic fields.
If I can use an analogy here, it's like the Swedish group was trying to play a beautiful, complex Mozart symphony to the brain, but their computer drummer kept skipping half a beat every 10 seconds to check his phone.
Exactly.
It completely destroys the melody. The brain just hears noise instead of music.
The symphony analogy is perfect. Persinger had already proven in extensive rat studies years prior that if you change the timing of the magnetic pulses by even a fraction of a millisecond, the biological effect is completely eliminated.
So the Swedish group didn't fail because the magnetic fields don't work.
They failed because their newer, faster computers completely destroyed the delicate algorithm needed to unlock the brain's neurochemical response.
Timing is everything.
The brain doesn't just reflexively respond to the presence of a magnet, it responds to information. The complexity of the magnetic field has to speak the exact temporal language of the brain to open the door to the right hemisphere.
And when it speaks that language perfectly, it can do incredible, terrifying things. I was shocked to see in the sources that these fields didn't just cause hallucinations.
Oh, they did so much more.
When they tuned the algorithm differently, specific magnetic patterns produced powerful analgesia pain relief that the studies found was equivalent to a clinical dose of morphine. They altered the pain thresholds in rats. They changed cellular expression.
We are talking about fundamentally hacking the human operating system at the root level using nothing but invisible magnetism.
And this laboratory phenomenon highlights a much larger global reality, doesn't it? Our brains are deeply, inescapably entangled with the electromagnetic environment of the Earth itself.
They absolutely are. The Earth generates immense, shifting geomagnetic activity due to solar wind. The researchers analyzed thousands of historical reports and found that global geomagnetic activity spiking over 20 to 30 nanoteslas reliably correlated with significantly increased reports of sensed presences, alien abductions, and intense vestibular experiences in the general population.
Wait. Are you saying that a massive solar flare erupting on the surface of the sun hitting the Earth's magnetic field can actually trigger the temporal lobes of sensitive people walking around on the ground and make them see a ghost in their house?
That is precisely what the massive statistical correlation suggests.
That is insane.
A severe spike in geomagnetic activity can act as a natural, chaotic, planetary scale version of Persinger's God helmet. It facilitates the subtle electrical instability in the temporal lobes of hypersensitive individuals, lowering the threshold for those right hemisphere intrusions to occur naturally.
The ghost isn't in the house. The ghost is in the solar wind interacting with your neurology.
Exactly.
Wow. So if we look back at the incredible journey we have taken today, what does this all mean for you, the listener? We have covered a massive, mind-bending amount of ground.
We certainly have.
We started with the realization that your brain is a hyper-vigilant, paranoid smoke detector, aggressively hunting for faces in the random noise of the world just to keep you alive from predators.
Right, pareidolia.
We learned that when you suffer a profound loss, your brain's predictive software weaponizes that exact system, literally rendering the sights, sounds, and smells of your loved ones to keep them alive for you, buffering the unbearable shock of the void.
We discovered that the physical architecture of our environment can violently betray us. That a silent 19 hertz infrasound wave bouncing down a 14th century stone corridor can physically vibrate your eyeballs and inner ear, tricking your physiology into a state of supernatural terror without your conscious consent.
And finally, we saw that the very architecture of our consciousness, the delicate boundary between self and other, between the mundane reality and the divine, can be picked like a lock.
Like a magnet.
By a 1 microtesla magnetic field pulsing at exactly 3 milliseconds against your right hemisphere, triggering the absolute undeniable conviction that God or a demon is standing right next to you.
It forces a total reevaluation of human history.
It really does.
It forces us to view every mystical experience, every ghost story, every profound spiritual awakening through a new lens. When Joan of Arc was hearing the voice of God instructing her, was she experiencing the divine, or was she experiencing a temporal lobe microseizure driven by right hemispheric intercalation?
Were the haunted, terrifying castles of Europe simply resonant chambers for low-frequency wind?
Exactly. It strips away the paranormal and replaces it with biology, physics, and code.
But as we wrap up, I think there is a final, highly provocative thought we need to leave you with today, a question to chew on.
Right.
We've spent this entire deep dive essentially proving that the brain creates the ghost. We've proven that we can synthesize the human soul in a cold laboratory with a weak magnet and a DOS computer.
But here's the lingering philosophical question.
Yeah.
If the profound, life-altering feeling of a soul or the overwhelming presence of a God can be perfectly synthesized by firing a 1 microtesla magnetic field into your right hemisphere for 30 minutes, does that physical mechanism make those experiences any less real to the person experiencing them?
Oh, that is the ultimate question. If I feel it, isn't it real?
Or, consider this perspective, does this research simply prove that human biology is a perfectly tuned, incredibly complex radio receiver?
I love that analogy.
Think about it. If I build a radio out of wires, silicon, and magnets, and it suddenly plays a beautiful, complex symphony, I don't arrogantly assume the radio invented the music inside its circuits.
Right. You assume it tuned into a frequency that was already existing in the air around it.
Perhaps these precise magnetic fields, this profound grief, this vibrating infrasound, perhaps they aren't creating meaningless hallucinations at all.
So what are they doing?
Perhaps they were simply twisting the dial on our neurology, forcefully shifting our brains away from the mundane, narrow static of daily survival, and allowing us to temporarily tune into the broader, infinitely more complex frequencies of human consciousness that surround us all the time, completely unseen.
I absolutely love that concept. A perfectly tuned radio receiver waiting for the right signal.
It's a nice thought.
It really is. So the next time you are standing completely alone in a quiet room and you feel that sudden, inexplicable chill down your spine, or you catch that fleeting gray shadow darting out of the corner of your eye, I want you to stop.
Don't panic.
Exactly. Don't panic, don't run, pay close attention, observe your own brain desperately trying to match patterns in the dark. Listen closely to the silent hum of the architecture around you.
And ask yourself,
Ask yourself, are you just burning toast in your evolutionary smoke detector, or has the dial on your receiver just been turned to a brand new frequency? Stay insanely curious, keep questioning your reality, and we will see you on the next deep dive.